What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. So after we discussed the 12 steps, then we started to explore differentiation and the consciousness that's related to different levels of differentiation. Differentiation is a very important concept in terms of emotional sobriety. I won't get into that now, but please, that's also available in our video archive library. And then after that, we were searching for where were we going to go next. And I decided, with the help of my colleagues, that we would explore how the steps also impact the development of true, or what we could call an authentic self-esteem. Now, remember, self-esteem being the evaluative component of our self-concept. It's how I think about myself, or I love the way Nathaniel Branden described it, is the reputation you have with yourself. So think about that for a minute. What reputation do you have with yourself? Do you trust yourself? Can you count on yourself? Are you congruent? Do your feet match your intentions? I mean, does your behavior, match, what you're experiencing and what you intend to do? These things become very, very important in terms of us getting honest with ourselves and looking at ourselves. And I've said this many times before, only the best in you can see the truth about you. And sometimes that truth is difficult to face, but it's very necessary to become what we can be. So we started the exploration looking at step one, seeing step 1 and 2 being very much involved in acceptance, in really starting to wake up in realizing that the consciousness that we were bringing to our life, the way that we were living our life, was really causing the problems that made our life unmanageable and also set us up, for our addiction. Step 2, we have this problem. We don't know what we're going to do about it. Herb summarizes it very succinctly, as did Terry Gorski. He would say, first step is about I can't. Step 2 says we can. That's what it is. So now we're into step 3. And as I said before, there's this momentum that's carrying us. There's a charge that's built up in step 1. I've got a hopeless condition. I'm in trouble. Step 2 comes along and says, well, there is hope for you. But now you're going to have to do something. That's the new charge. This is the first step, as Bill describes it, as our taking affirmative action, making a decision, turning away from, turning towards something new in our life. And we've done I've been really, really moved and stimulated by the discussions we've had of step 3 recently. Now, Roger, you've just done a phenomenal job for the last several weeks on talking about things. Today, I want to pick up the discussion of this and look at it in terms of Bill's discussion of dependency and how we react to it. And I say that because looking at our dependency and our relationship to that dependency becomes a very important component of emotional sobriety. So he starts to identify dependencies in this. And we will get to that in a minute. But I want to say something, is that Bill is saying in this step, we're turning our lives over to what he calls a newfound providence. But what is this providence that we're turning our life over to? Well, I decided to look up the word providence tonight. And this is what I found, that providence is the protective care of God or of nature as a spiritual power. the protective care of God or of nature as a spiritual power. So now I'm turning myself over to this providence in my life. Now, Bill identifies a very interesting reaction that we may have to that. You know, in many ways, I've credited with Bill with some incredible insight into the human experience, and it really proves to be true here. He says one of the first things that's going to happen when we start to think about giving ourselves over to this providence is the fear of us becoming a non-entity. Now, if you look at the writing of existentialists, one of the greatest fears we have is of nothingness, of being nothing. And Bill says, if we start to give ourselves to something, am I going to lose my sense of self, my self-concept that I have, developed to good or bad up to this particular point in time in my life? Will I lose myself in this program of recovery? And so there's an awful lot, and sometimes the resistance that this generates is at an unconscious level. You don't realize it, but there's going to be a part of you that says, I don't want to lose myself. I need to keep a hold of myself, because if I don't have me, I have nothing. I am nothing. I just thought it was incredible that he addresses that fear at this point in terms of us giving our lives over to this providence, whether it's over to the care of God, of your understanding, or as I do, to this force in nature that I think is inside us that moves us towards becoming more differentiated and becoming what we can be, whatever it is. But it's giving ourselves to that means I have to give something up. Now, my dear friend, Dr. Kempler, would never shy away from taking a battle on. And I remember one time he was working with this woman who says, oh my God, I'd have to give up this part of me. And he looked at her and he said, without a doubt, he says, that's worth giving up, lady. Dump that part of you. It sure isn't serving you well. You see, when we face these things and we start to get afraid of giving something up, we need to realize that giving it up, while we may not have anything to replace it, if we stay on this journey, there's a possibility of developing some parts of us that we have never even seen and realized, because our consciousness didn't let us see that. So he goes on to say in this chapter, which is such a great chapter, we're afraid of becoming the hole in the donut. That's the way he described the existential dilemma, the hole in the donut. Then he goes on to say, and I just love this, therefore, dependence as AA practices it is really a means of gaining true independence of spirit. So here we begin to start to see some of the elements of emotional sobriety that he's talking about. You see, we want to connect to something that's going to create a true independence of spirit. I think when he uses the word dependency, it gets a little confusing, but I can see what he's saying when he says it, is that the relationship we want to have with our experience is one that creates this true independence of spirit. And now the issue is how do we get there? It's a wonderful goal. It's a great thing to really strive towards. But, we've got to confront some other issues. He goes on to say how persistently we claim the right to decide all by ourselves just what we shall think and just how we shall act. Dr. Harry Tiebout was with first psychiatrist who studied alcoholics. He was involved in the first groups or with many of the members of the first groups in Connecticut that were finding this way of life. He looked at some of the characteristics that he saw in his patients that were common. And he said, to a person, one of the things I see in every one of the alcoholics I'm treating is a defiant independence. They want to do it their way. They don't want to be told what to do. Why don't they want to be told what to do? Well, Bill gave us idea. No one wants to be the hole in the donut. No one wants to be the hole in the donut. He goes, but in addition to that, we think there is no one we can surely trust. And this becomes the issue. You see, we're going to challenge our understanding of dependence, because for us, dependence means somebody else is going to take care of me. But when you've had trauma in your life, when you've been abused by the religion that you've been involved in, or when you've had parents that were supposed to love and protect you and they didn't and instead abused you, how can you trust anyone to take care of you? Well, you can't. Here's the dilemma we have. We can't do that. So what do we have to do? How do we find our way out of that dilemma that we're confronting? Well, there's going to be an answer to it. Bill, comes up, he says, well, we are certain that our intelligence, backed by willpower, can rightly control our inner lives and guarantee us success in the world we live in. Now, that observation he made, and that's the defiant independence, Dr. Karen Horney calls it, it's believing in the superiority of our mind. That if we just understand and figure it out and can control things, we're going to be okay. You see, that's the path we've all taken. But he says, give it the acid test. He's playing Dr. Phil. How is that working for you? That's what Bill is saying at this point in time. He goes, give it the acid test. How well does that actually work in your life? Now, this is where us getting honest with ourselves becomes so important. You cannot, unfold according to the things that we're talking about with a high degree of self-honesty, of being able to see who you are and who you aren't. Talks about self-sufficiency, and that obviously in our culture, self-sufficiency is glorified. Is that, God, if you're a self-sufficient person, you are an incredible person. You've, made a man out of yourself or a woman out of yourself, and you've done it all by yourself. And isn't that the American way? Well, maybe not. maybe that's a great way to enter the hell gates of suffering, but it may not be the way to growing ourselves according to what we want in our life. And then he says this, he goes, we realize that the word dependence is as distasteful to many psychiatrists and psychologists as it is to alcoholics. Like our professional friends, we too are aware that there are wrong forms of dependence. We have experienced many of them. No adult man or woman, for example, should be in too much emotional dependence upon a parent. They should have been weaned long before, and if they have not, they should wake up to the fact. This very form of faulty dependence has caused many a rebellious alcoholic to conclude that dependence of any sort must be intolerably damaging. So what he starts to raise is this idea of what we're gonna talk about today. This idea that comes out of, I want to coin a new phrase for you today. I want to call it the compromised self. And then I will define what that means. The compromised self is characterized by a lack of faith in one's ability to grow and cope with reality and life as it is. The compromised self believes and feels like it knows that that the environment must support it to be okay, and that the environmental support is the only path to real happiness and contentment. Environmental support meaning that things have to go the way I imagine them to go for me to be okay. That we all write a script about what life is supposed to look like, how it's supposed to be. The transactional analysis people called it, you develop a racket that's part of your script, and then you go through life trying to get everybody to go along with this script that you've written about life. And if they don't go along with it, you try to control it, just like Bill describes in the big book, right? We're actors who believe that we're directors, right? And if only people would do as we wish, then everything would be fine. See, that's the compromised self that grows out of our false self. It's compromised because there's a complete lack of faith in our ability to grow up and to learn to cope with life as it is. So we have to make life conform to our expectations if we're going to be okay. Well, he's beginning to plant the seed in this step to start to challenge that idea. He's beginning to see that, you know what, the dependency that you've had, I'm not going to call it a wrong dependency, because I don't believe there's a wrong dependency. I believe that our emotional dependency is very much a natural part of who we are as human beings, our need to be connected, our need to be loved, all of those things. They're not wrong. Their instincts gone awry, as Bill calls them, at some point in time, and we get stuck and we don't know how to grow ourselves and take the next step in our growth. But we're always going to be dependent. I'm dependent on the oxygen in this room. See, being dependent on things doesn't necessarily mean that I'm now turning, my will and my life over to those things. It means that I recognize that I need this oxygen. So if I want it, I better inhale and exhale. If I want this oxygen to be a part of me, which I need to live, I'm going to have to participate in my life. And isn't it funny that the first thing we do when we're born is to breathe? We are learning the lesson then that, look, there's going to be things that you need that are going to be in your environment, but you're going to have to participate to make that happen. It's almost like we're told from birth, no one is coming. You're going to have to start breathing for yourself. Here, young man, young lady, let's get on with it. And if you don't do it, you get a little pat on the butt, right? And the baby cries, and that does it. As soon as the cry happens, now the breathing starts. So this is an amazing thing now. We're starting to question all of these relations. Our dependency, we need things in our environment for us to grow. We need connection, relationships, but it's the way we're connected to them that's our responsibility. And that's what's starting to be introduced to us in this step, is that we've got to participate in a very different way in our life if our life is going to work. We can't just think that we can do it all by ourselves, nor can we think that someone else is going to do it for us. It's going to be something in between that, something very different, that we're going to have to learn to participate and to engage in our life and to be present in a very different way than we've ever been. What opens the door? The key that opens the door is, you guys heard us say it last time, willingness. The willingness to go off and start to discover this and what all of this means for us is what happens in this step. So now let me invite my colleagues in and let's see what they'd like to say about all of this, and we'll look forward to next week beginning our journey in step 4. Thom, good evening.
Hey.
Roger, good evening. And I know Herb is here as well.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Shall we sing? I got it. Jesus. Oh my God. It's like, that's special, and that's what's special is because I don't think many people probably think of you as mean, but I've inspired you to be mean. That's I feel I'm special.
Alan's seen me mean a moment or two in his life.
I bet.
Hey.
So yeah. Go ahead,
okay.
Thom.
All right. Well, I'll just say when we think about dependence, emotional dependence, I used to do a workshop a couple of decades ago called addiction, seeing addiction as the best metaphor for the human condition. It's just the best way to think about it. And I think it's also Buddhism. It's about attachment. It's about just how connected and how attached we are. And I like what Alan, what you say about it's not about categorizing good and bad attachments or dependencies. It's about evaluating the basically the same thing we do with when we're dealing with any other kind of addiction. You evaluate consequences, positive and negative consequences. But I love the idea that getting down to just our dependence, not just our addiction, my addiction to alcohol or drugs or control or whatever, all the various things that I have, I list among the things that I am recovering from. But the dependence as a human being on others, and sometimes that is in the form of on another, in a relationship where I need this person to think of a certain way for me to be okay. I need this person to be this person and think of me so that I'll be okay. And sometimes it's even generally about other people in general, just how we're seen. It's amazing how often when we're asked to say something about what we want to be in this world, we really answer in the form of how we want other people to see us. And then it comes back to this thing that I think is one of the themes of all of these conversations that we have, is that it's basically learning how to live from the inside out instead of the outside in. And so we're challenged to define ourselves from the inside, and that involves a really weird question for us initially that most of us are uncomfortable with, which is, what do I want? Who do I want to be? It's like want has such a our culture has put such a negative connotation on want, because it's like, we think of it as only as like this sort of negative, selfish thing. Like I want a new car. I want everything to go my way. But the truth is, if we look at the best question to be in touch with our value system is that question of what do I want? Because if you ask me what I want, what about getting things in my life, what I would say is, I sit here and I'll just use us as an example, sitting here looking at you, the other three of you guys. I want the very best. I want the very best for myself. It's like, and I want the very best for each of you as well. And that's the truth. That's the difference in my recovery is that I include myself. It's like before I would not have done that, but I do. So we get to the place where this is the main point I want to make is the idea. And I've made this point in our first run through with the 12 steps before. And that is, we're being challenged to accept something brand new, either to invite something in or the providence, what you're talking about. And what we're going to find is that there's a little bit of a problem here, because you hand me something and I reach out to get it, and sure enough, there's something in my hand, and there's something else. So I can't take what it is there is for me to get unless I can put this down, and this has to come first. The idea that I have to let go first. Yeah. I had a journal back in the last century called Conversations with My Gut. And it's like, unfortunately, Donald Neil Walsh beat me to Conversations with God, but it was kind of the same thing, because I just kept having these conversations and writing these out. And one of the things I noticed very clearly, and I do this with my clients sometimes, I encourage anybody to do it, is have a conversation with the wisest part of you. Name it whatever you want to name it. But what you're going to find is what I think mostly what I found, which is, I am, as everybody who's been in this meeting knows, I am extremely verbose. I have, blah, blah. I say a lot of things and just keep talking. The wise part of me, and I think the wise part of most of us, is a lot less verbose and is a lot more concise. And I remember one particular entry in this journal where it was saying, it just said to me, the wise voice said, trust. I can't even remember what the content was, but it was trust. And I remember I went into paragraphs about how basically the thing was, all right, trust, I can do that. It's like, what I want you to do is I want you to pay me half now and half when the job is done. I want you to show me something I can trust, so give me some evidence of that, and then I will trust, and then I will leap out there and take this leap of faith, and then you can pay me the rest of it later. And all it said, and this comes out of my own little head as I'm sitting on my little typewriter, and all it says is, well, that wouldn't be trust, would it? And that was it. It did not go on to explain. And it's like, it's always about letting go first. And that is the challenge here, the hard part. And I'll just wrap it up by saying, and by the way, I'll say it, I'll end with this instead. It's the dependency when we're talking about identity, about who we are, what we, who we're going to be, who we want to be. It's not just about being attached to some kind of positive view of ourselves. Most of us have stories about being extremely dependent and attached to very negative views of ourselves. What we're attached to, what our emotional dependency very much is on, in my opinion, is to the familiar. And we get many people in this room right now can identify with the idea of getting to a place in your life where if somebody has really positive views of you, you have trouble trusting them. Or if they do this outrageous thing called loving you, that you have trouble trusting them. It's like, you don't, I'm working with a young man right now who is with a young woman who I think loves him dearly, very much. And it scares him so badly. And he just keeps looking for everything to be wrong because he can't possibly imagine. He's finally getting to that place where he can't possibly imagine that he is worth that love and worth being loved. And it's like the dependency he has is on holding on to the negative view of himself.
Yep.
So that's what I want to say.
Cool.
Thanks, Thom.
Mm-hmm.
Herb?
Thank you. Yeah, I've been busy writing notes on everything that everybody has said and then trying to make sense of what is it that I want to share as my experience. Alan, it's interesting. I haven't heard that word, providence, in 60 years.
Wow.
The last book I was reading when I left the monastery was called Abandonment to Divine Providence. It's been rewritten or translated out of the French and put into English language. And the people who did that, one of the interpretations they used on the cover, not that title, but they used the term surrender, which tells me immediately they did not understand abandonment to divine providence. Because, and you hear the word with step 3 in meetings, similarly, people translating it into surrender. It's anything but surrender. In fact, I go so far to the other side, I use the term, it's a ferocious act of my free will.
Yeah.
Because I'm making a decision to turn and accept reality and learn how to do that by doing steps 4 through 9 to, in fact, deconstruct all of my beliefs about reality. Because my beliefs are delusional. I don't know that going in. I know that now only in retrospect. It's interesting that you mentioned about the focus and the development, human development. And I'm not sure this is true, but it came to mind that there was a renaissance in history that brought human beings to really value the mind and science. And then you mentioned the existentialists who then developed a whole theory about reality using the will and brought some spirituality into the conversation in contrast to science, secular versus the spiritual. And what you're talking about here is very clear to me, and you use the word integration. It's about the wholeness of the human being, bringing in the mind and the will, bringing in the science and the spiritual, so that it's integrated as the whole person. And that's that emotional sobriety, which is the balance. I'm just getting warmed up.
I love to see that.
Praise be.
Well, really, I mean, because the key word in step 3 is turning our will and our life over to the care of God, not to God. I sit in the driver's seat. It's my car. I'm responsible to go where I want to go. And I know where I want to go. I just don't know how to get there. And so I have a GPS, all right? And I input the address as to where to go. And then I listen to the GPS and I follow direction. And I get to where I'm going to go after maybe a couple course corrections, like a U-turn or a left turn or a whatever, all right? And this,
Recalculating.
I call it course recalibrating, or recalculating, course correction.
Yes.
I'm not a one of the things I've learned in our whole emotional sobriety effort is to emphasize I'm not a mistake. I make mistakes, but I'm not a mistake, and my mistakes don't name me. I have the opportunity to promote and foster my consciousness so that I make less mistakes less frequently. I correct them more effectively and more frequently. And it's about alignment. My word for step 3 is alignment. I'm recently, I don't know why, but I'm recently very conscious of a fundamental experience that people have about a story they believe, that they're broken, that they're organically defective. And they either take it and run to the bottom, or they take it and run to the top in a very delusional way of grandiosity and or that depressive, whatever that would be. And neither of them is true, but it comes from this. And so I'm so glad we're doing this thing on self-esteem, because it's what will foster emotional sobriety, to have a realistic view of reality as it's manifesting.
Yeah. See, I call that the compromised self, Herb. That's what I'm referring to.
Yes. And if I don't have accurate glasses, I will see inaccurately.
Yeah.
But to the extent that my glasses are grounded to be more accurate, I will at least be able to see reality effectively. And that's where we're going to start with the step 4 through step 9 is the grinding of the lenses, which in the final where we're going with this whole development, this 4 through 9, as I see it, is to correct the lenses so that we have an accurate view of reality and are empowered. And what you talk about an esteem builder is when I am effective in my life, getting the consequences and the outcomes that I had hoped for by the actions that I take. In contrast to when I haven't done inventory or the other work that deconstructs that false self, I am taking actions believing that if only I try harder, I'm going to have better results. And the whole point of step 3 is to get ourselves in alignment with reality as it is and to accept that. That whole providence thing is to see reality. And I just loved your definition. It's something about nature and the power of nature and that energy. We don't need to use the word God and higher power. Oh, I mean, those are cool words, but it's this life force in the energy. You called it the organismic life force at one point when you were looking at the acorn and the oak tree. And that's the reality that I hope exists, and I'm going to act as if it is. And voila, my life is beginning to really work.
Yeah, right. Wow. Cool.
I'm gonna stop.
I'm so impressed, guys. I just am. You have given me and all of us, all three of you, just there's so much to me, just richness and wisdom.
Well, but you got to top us all and bring it on.
Actually that's my little prelude there, because you've given me a lot and more than enough to think about, and in the total picture tonight, I don't really want to add anything at this point. I want to give participants a chance to see what you've provoked or evoked, provocatively or evocatively for them. So thank you.
Before we go on to open it up, Thom, don't do it just yet, because I do want to tie it a little bit more into the self-esteem.
Sure.
What's very interesting is that one of Dr. Nathaniel Branden's pillars, right, or practices of self-esteem, is taking personal responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, he is such an advocate, right? A proponent of that. We need to step up. I mean, he's the person I quoted as saying, above his door in his psychotherapy office was a sign that said, "No one is coming." I mean, because he really wanted people to be empowered to see that you have many more possibilities, we'll use my term, than your compromised self would let you know. Then you can know that you have available to you. And he was wonderful at helping people discover. And once again, remember, we're talking about these steps as an experiential therapy. It's not just a thought therapy. You're not just thinking your way. You are going to be living your way in doing things to bring this, as Dr. Branden did. He just didn't talk about self-esteem with people. He helped them confront certain beliefs that they had in themselves that were blocking them from being able to realize their self-esteem, as well as prompting them to stimulate other parts of themselves that they didn't know about. So it's very exciting, you guys. I really appreciate the discussion. And I'm looking forward to step 4.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.